now. Going live. Alrighty, everybody, we are live. Wxcenter live. I don't know if you could consider this a post-tropics topic or a post-tropics tropic topic. One of the two. But we're going to start off with, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It is 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We're doing our live stream on Monday Night Live. We're going to talk a little bit about some live updates because we have a very, very intense and very large-scale weather system that's forecasted to take shape across the South and Central Plains and then escalate quickly into a very robust Great Lakes nor'easter system, also helping to create another area of highlighted potential severe weather, already indicated on Storm Prediction Center's charts, and this is on the day 6 outlook. So it goes to show that they're definitely tracking something big coming on the horizon, and the models have been verifying really well run to run in terms of not losing steam with this. The last couple of systems that we forecasted were going to be very, very bomb-like systems moving up the eastern seaboard into the northeast. They reflected to the mid and long-range portions of most of our forecast models and then were washed out completely, never came to fruition. So they're holding together, and SPC does seem to think that it warrants highlighting something this far out in advance, what they typically don't do. Usually day 4 through 6, they leave it, or day 4 through 8, I should say, they typically leave it blank for a reason. As we're letting folks join, we'll stay on this homepage, SPC. And just to give you a bit of a back brief, we're also going to be talking this possible severe weather event. We're going to briefly touch on the atmospheric river setup for the Pacific Northwest. We're going to look at some of the residual impacts that the Great Lakes in the Northeast could be facing as well. And then we're going to revisit what it was that we were discussing last Friday in terms of the tropics and what could possibly be taking shape for next hurricane season. Because I'm noticing it's finally starting to pick up some steam, and people are talking about it, and I love it. I love the fact that we're having these conversations, and we're not afraid to upset the general public by talking about a future hurricane season despite what happened this year. And that's exactly kind of the term that we're using for this video. We're actually going to look at the truth behind this hurricane season and why so many people probably think it was a bust despite what actually happened. And we're going to try to unearth the reasoning behind it because I've been doing a lot of research. Like a ton of research. Let's go ahead and start saying hello to some folks in the chat. Let's see, who do we have? Mick and Marley, howdy. Nomad Cat 4, if Hurricane Idalia hadn't taken that eastward track so quickly, we would have had Wxcenter Nazario covering a landfalling hurricane. Yep, and I would have storm chased it too, but it decided to swoop in overnight. I remember I woke up at like 3:30, 4 in the morning, and I was all tired doing an update video on the track. Who do we contact about retiring? The letter I storms, especially in Florida. Ivan, Ida, Irma, Idalia, Ian. I'm probably missing one or two. Yeah, you never know. I'm sorry about my weather geek rant there about Hurricane Idalia. This severe weather event is getting concerning. Oh, yeah, that's going to be a big one. This could be our first big-time storm system for the fall / almost the winter season. We're in the meteorological winter, so we could technically say our first bona fide winter storm. I'm talking on all levels. So we'll see what happens. How close are we? Welcome in. Zenful, hello there. Bombshell, Leah Janelle, welcome. Aston, good night. Good to see you. Let's see. Dark Earth, welcome, welcome. Good to see you. All right, so let's go right into the models so then we can pick up where we left off on Friday. We're gonna start out with our Euro. They call it the high res here on Pivotal Weather. Right out of the gate, you see tremendous rainfall occurring across the Pacific Northwest, predominantly in Washington State with a little bit of a rain-snow mix for parts of British Columbia spanning into Alberta. And it's very neat. If you look, the cross-barrier flow right in through here, creating some lee side warming, is actually where the snow line stops. If you see it abruptly deletes or terminates right as you go from the windward side to the leeward side of the Rockies, because you have very strong upper-level winds moving across the terrain, and that downsloping is causing adiabatic warming as it descends the mountainous terrain, upping the winds on the lee of the Rockies, but also warming the temperature profile of the atmosphere. And that's cool how you can kind of pick it out and what the models are determining where our rainfall and our snowfall is going to likely be. This is going to lead to some very, very sporadic but heavy loads of rain and flood. I should rephrase that. Excuse me. This is going to lead to isolated sporadic instances of very, very large amounts of rainfall accumulation, especially on the windward side of the Cascades up there. That's going to be a prolonged event for, I mean, you can see it continues going and going and going throughout much of the loop. And then here comes our system finally propagating out of the northern Rockies, moving across the northern tier states into the upper Great Lakes. That's not the one we're monitoring for. It's this one down here, this bad boy that's starting to undergo cyclogenesis down once again in the southern plains, very indicative of our El Nino. Very, very strong polar high situated over the Intermountain West and the Central Rockies, the Four Corners, I should say, right in terms of where the Intermountain West region would sit. And you can see our 528 line is right in through here. So we have very, very good polar front jet energy coming down. We probably have another embedded shortwave trough that's really going to amp up the development of our low pressure down here. If we don't see severe weather with this, I would be very, very, very astonished, because of the fact that if I were to rewind this loop and you go back in time, look at how long we've had a very, very good high pressure situated over the south. And the reason I bring that up is not only are we having phenomenal weather here, at least most of the week, but the backside and the south side of this is only going to continue to pull instability, buoyancy, and tropical air out of the south and put it over the deep south. And as that system begins to work its way in and come down out of the Rockies and form up, look at how just widespread of a nasty weather event we're expecting to take place. And this has been the trend for the last several days now. Even if I've been very absent from social media and YouTube and talking to you guys, this has been making its rounds. And you can see that it's going to be a very, very aggressive system. We're likely to see some severe weather out in through here if this frontal line actually gets as active as it looks. That could possibly be a very, very intense situation for us here in Central Florida as this pops through, because we're going to have very good cold air advection on the upside of this. We're going to have very, very good maritime tropical air just sort of marinating over the peninsula. So large, stark contrast in temp and dew point with very aggressive mid to upper level flow to deal with as well. And then you can see as the system bombs out, it's going to fly through the Northeast and through the Great Lakes, giving us a potential widespread freezing rain, heavy snow, sleet event for a lot of our folks in the Midwest. The Midwest is definitely under the gun for more of a freezing rain, sleet event. And then just torrential rains and strong thunderstorms across the eastern seaboard until it finally clears out. Hopefully by the time we get into the beginning of next week, Monday, Tuesday, it'll be starting to transition up into Canada. And then you folks in the eastern Canadian provinces are going to have to do battle with it. You can see the same thing on the Canadian model. The Canadian model has been verifying really well. The GFS has been kind of back and forth with it. That's why we're not going to look at it. But there goes our Alberta Clipper, if you want to call it that, going across the Canadian territories or the Canadian provinces. And once again, really, really aggressive cyclogenesis, a strong pressure gradient forming around this system over the south and the southern plains, the deep south. Dixie Alley, parts of the southern Tornado Alley are going to be primed and ripe for some really good, significant weather. Definitely thinking that SPC is going to elevate those severe weather probabilities as we go further in time. And Canadian model says the exact same thing, calling for a possible severe weather event here in Florida, up the eastern seaboard, and then is in line with what the European model is calling for, with about the same time frame as well, kicking out of that region by the time we get into Monday and Tuesday, hopefully. And then we're left over with some very, very aggressive cool air and almost a zonal west to east flow in our jet. You can see the 540 lines right in through here, just spanning west to east across the United States. A little bit of ridging trying to make its way into the west coast. So we're going to start to see a warm up out there once again as we get into middle of next week. And then we finally get a break. You can see here, at the very back end of the Canadian model, it looks like something tries to form up once again over the deep south as we get a little bit of return flow over this, or at the bottom portion of this 1036 high. But the rest of the United States is hoping to be quiet for at least the middle portions of the month. And then it's going to be interesting to see exactly what preliminary Christmas forecasts and what New Year's Eve is going to look like. In fact, I'll take you to the end of the European model, and as you go through time, you can see even on the Euro, we look to get some hints and whispers of cyclogenesis once again occurring right at that same spot too. Time and time again, we've had cyclogenesis right over the two panhandles here, Oklahoma and Texas. This is like our hot spot. And then they advect off in this kind of a fashion, like so, riding both the polar front, digging in like this, and then interacting with our subtropical jet. And it's usually right in through here somewhere. It'll boomerang back to the west-northwest and the northwest, or northeast, excuse me. Still thinking tropics, but reverse that. East-northeast, and then east-northeast eventually. So hopefully middle of the week, next week, things will finally calm down and we'll get a little bit of a break, and then we'll start bracing for our next possible severe event. And now we're going to go down into the tropics for a little bit because I've been seeing the interwebs panicking because there was a rogue run of the European model. I think it was yesterday. We had a rogue run of the Euro suddenly mentioning tropical storm. And it's like, calm down. Don't panic. I know everyone's going to hype it, and I saw a bunch of videos mentioning already. So I'm going to take you through exactly what we were seeing. So this is our 12Z from yesterday. And there's our first frontal line. We have our front just hanging out over the Caribbean right there. Good delineation between our maritime, well, our modified continental polar air mass and then our maritime tropical air mass like so. There's a very weak tropical wave that people are thinking is going to manage to make its way through. You can kind of see it right in through here, make its way through the Caribbean. Here comes that very, very explosive system, that line of possible severe weather action for most of us in the southeast. And then look at what happens here. The Euro was suddenly thinking, uh-oh, what does that look like? So, of course, the interwebs were ablaze with Tropical Storm Vince. And it's like, no, guys, shut up already. That's not what's happening. I mean, is that a possibility? Could we see something get whacked by that front and spin real quick? Absolutely. That's what we saw when National Hurricane Center randomly highlighted that Invest 99 at the very tail end of hurricane season, mid to late November, if you guys remember. We had the tail end of the front, grab some vorticity, spin it, and then it disappeared. So everyone was freaking out about this, and there was no cause for alarm. And you could see even the Euro model dissipates it within seconds, or I should say within panels of it forming up. And then you come over to 12Z today, and you can see it's gone. You get some possible really good interaction, overrun. You see, and that's the thing too. What's happening down here is called overrunning, frontal overrunning, because you have a warm core system propagating in like so, with our frontal boundary pushing in like this. And obviously we know cold air is denser and heavier than warm air. So as that cold air comes in, the warm thing has nothing better to do but go boop up and lift over it. And that's overrunning the top of it. And that's why, if anything, I would be forecasting a possible heavy rain and flooding event for Central America as opposed to talking tropics. I wouldn't even mention tropics. I would just mention we have a frontal situation with some overrunning of warm air from the Caribbean from the prevailing easterlies out there, hitting that cold front that's expecting to be very, very strong, give us lots of severe weather in the south and the southeast. And that's exactly why the air mass interaction is going to be boom, like so. And as that overrunning continues, it's going to train those storms over Belize, Nicaragua, Honduras, the same places we've been talking about during hurricane season. And I dare somebody out there to say it's tropical impacts, because I'm going to just give me your meteorology card right now. It's not tropical impacts. I'm revoking your weather card right now, and I'm shutting down your YouTube channel if somebody says that. I'm going to be bold enough to claim it. And for the first time, the Euro is the only one calling for this. The GFS, the Canadian, the Icon, none of them have it on there. So for once, the Euro is kind of flip-flopping like GFS and being like, could we maybe see something in December? But no, that's not going to happen. All right, so those are our big, big weather players we're tracking, especially for the south and the southeast. I would not be surprised if we do get severe weather from that frontal boundary if it comes through Florida with that aggressive of a stature as indicated by our models as of right now. In fact, if we look at the surface-based CAPE, as it moves through, we have quite a bit. We definitely have quite a bit of even just surface-based buoyancy to tap into. Look at that. That's more than we've seen for much of the season so far. And then even in Florida, it doesn't look like much, but we get a nice little surge of buoyancy as that frontal system comes across the state. And don't let these colors fool you, because I know that they look gray and whitish, but if you look down at the tool here, we're easily going to have over 1,000 to 1,500 joules per kilogram of surface-based CAPE down here in Florida specifically, and down in the deep south and up the mid-Atlantic coast. So lots of really good surface-based instability to work with. Bulk shear, it goes without saying, we're going to have quite a bit of that because we have so much mixing going on between not only the jets, but that very, very potent system that's going to form. Look at that. Really, fairly southerly dig and trough, scraping the Gulf coastline and going through the northern periphery of Florida. So anybody right in through here is going to see the worst of that, because you have two jet interactions, one and then two, and then you have just nothing but a fire hose of diffluent and divergent air out ahead of it. So we could very well see a East Coast / Eastern Seaboard severe weather event ranging from multiple different phenomena too. I'm not talking just thunderstorms. We could have severe weather in the form of freezing rain, sleet, heavy snow, blizzard conditions. So from the entire eastern half of the United States, we could see something from this system. So that's definitely on my radar. And I may make a video about it and get like 200 views. We'll see. But all right, so let's talk a little bit about the future of the tropics, because I've been researching quite a bit in the background. And I'm learning even more than I did during this hurricane season, and even more than I did during the actual times where I was doing some tropical analysis. So there's definitely a lot to cover. I have a lot of notes behind me. I'm not going to bring them in because they'll be here for the rest of the night. But in layman's terms, I'm trying to be one of the best tropical forecasters for next year, and you guys can make fun of me and call that cringy. It's true, though. I'm like investigating every little piece of possible information and researching every breadcrumb that there is for tropical forecasting. And to give you a crash course, I already know exactly what it is we need to be monitoring for before the hype train starts. Because, I mean, next year, if we're looking at a neutral to a weak La Nina, you best believe we're going to have a full hype hurricane season upon us. If we thought the hype this year was bad, we're actually going to have legitimate reasons to hype next year, and there's going to be life-threatening situations everywhere you look. And I don't mean that literally. I mean just, if we were calling tropical waves extreme and all that, just imagine when we have Cat 4s and whatnot brewing on our doorstep. So right out of the gate, I'm sure a few of you guys are familiar with the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation. Believe it or not, the North Atlantic Oscillation, that's part of the reason why this hurricane season kind of seemed like a bust. I was investigating exactly how warm temperatures in El Nino influence what our oscillating pattern does here, just specifically in the North Atlantic. And it turns out that most of the time during El Nino, if you look on this side right here, this is kind of what we were sitting under for most of the tropical season. We were in a positive NAO. Now, some people will argue that it was bouncing back and forth between negative and positive, but even right now, if you look at our charts, especially upper air analysis, we have our polar front jet screaming across the north, dipping down over the northeast, kind of the mid-Atlantic, Midwest region, and then boomeranging back up towards the poles and the upper latitudes. And we've had a weak high pressure over much of the Atlantic. So the NAO is going to be something I'm very, very focusing on, or I'm going to be very focused on for next hurricane season, even before it starts. I just want to see exactly how it oscillates and how it changes on a couple-week basis, because I believe I read and researched that it ebbs and flows between every 2 to 5, maybe even 6 to 7 weeks is when it'll oscillate. It can be very quick to transition. It can be very slow to transition. It's all dependent on what's happening underneath it, what's happening above it in terms of our jet. But in layman's terms, for those of you who don't know, believe it or not, the North Atlantic Oscillation is solely just mean sea level pressure down at the surface. We either have very, very strong and potent low pressures and high pressures down at the surface up against Africa and Europe, as well as low pressure off the Greenland coastline and up in the, closer to the poles. And that'll define our negative NAO. And then our positive NAO is going to be very weak high pressure, very weak low pressure, and a more of a zonal propagation in our jet from the United States to the north, providing Europe with some very, very extreme conditions. And if you guys remember, I don't think Thomas is in here right now, but Thomas was coming in from the UK and reporting on how it was wet, rainy, and they were getting a lot of storms out in that general area, which right there is a key indicator that we were in for most portion, or I should say the back end of hurricane season. For the most part, we were in a positive NAO because they were getting fed all the storms that were coming across quickly off the United States and boomeranging up towards Europe and the United Kingdom. So this is going to be one of the big key factors, one of our large-scale factors that we need to monitor for. I need to find how to access the CANSIPS climatology data, but the CANSIPS model in specific, as of December now, is thinking that we could definitely dip closer to a La Nina than just the neutral season next year, which regardless, neutral, La Nina, we've established both of those mean danger for the United States, for the Caribbean, for the Gulf Coast. So neutral to La Nina, we don't want to hear that. Do I want to hear that? Yeah, but do we want to hear that? No, because what that means is, number one, we're probably going to have more of a negative NAO across much of our North Atlantic. And I'll show you guys right here. There was a wonderful map that I found earlier that just kind of spells it out for you. Let me see if I can find it in Google Images real quick. Here you go. Let me see if I can zoom in on this. There we go. All right, so this would be a negative NAO right here. We have a very strong high pressure across much of the Atlantic. And then we have a very strong low pressure up near the poles and up towards Greenland, etc. In fact, let me go find my actual, whatchamacallit. Let me see if I can find, or here we go. This is going to be the negative. Sorry about that. Here's the negative NAO. So with the negative NAO, we have all of our prevailing easterlies across the tropics, and then we have our jet stream screaming across like this with a very robust high pressure helping to drive systems like so. In layman's terms, what I've come to research and notice is that when we have an aggressive NAO setup, that typically helps to steer things up and out. When we have a more relaxed NAO, that's when things tend to come a little bit closer. Or I may have them flipped. I'm not sure. I've digested so much information today, I'm not even joking. I could have it flipped. Here's another great example of it if you need imagery. So with a positive phase, we have a strong high pressure, strong low pressure out there, and that's where we're getting all the storms funneling across the Gulf, not the Gulf, across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, through into the Gulf of Mexico perhaps, as opposed to up and out. And then we're going to refer back to this bad boy because I've been reading this left and right and researching other little tidbits of the references that they put into this this research paper that they did. And let's see, where did I have the NAO portion of it? I know it's in here somewhere. Here we go. So this is what stood out to me because I noticed only a few people out here this year mentioned the MJO and the NAO. And right here it says, in addition to ENSO, the North Atlantic Oscillation has been investigated for possible climate impacts on hurricanes. Tracks of major hurricanes were identified and correlated with phases of the NAO by Elsner et al. 2000. The study found that major hurricane activity at high and low latitudes are inversely related. Above normal activity at low latitudes was found to occur when activity at high latitudes were below normal and vice versa. So essentially, in layman's terms, it goes on to explain that, let's see, found that the Gulf Coast was more likely to see a major hurricane strike during a relaxed NAO, so I got it, while the East Coast was more likely to see a major hurricane strike during an excited NAO. In this work, the years of East Coast landfalls and Florida landfalls are also classified according to North Atlantic oscillation. And then we have some tables down here that I'm not really going to show you because it's basically gibberish. So the North Atlantic Oscillation is going to be a key, and I honestly do believe that once we switch to more of a neutral, let's not go on YouTube while we're on YouTube, that once we switch more to a neutral and maybe even a weak La Nina next year, we're going to start to see a transition in our North Atlantic steering setup. And El Nino directly played a role in how it established itself this year, which is why if you come over to this chart one more time, if you remember, we had a safe zone of troughing across our coastline for a large majority of the hurricane season. As you can see right here, we have our negative NAO, which is where we have a very weak setup, very weak here, very weak here. So our surface systems are not really influencing our North Atlantic pattern, the environmental flow. And then we had a trough for the most part across the East Coast. If you guys remember, I even did a video on how, the pattern was possibly going to shift, and then as soon as it shifted right back, so that didn't stand. That unfortunately was a bust. We ended up maintaining this trough ridge, trough pattern for much of the hurricane season. And if you look, that's exactly why we had our weak surface high pressure kind of nestled in against the Spain, Portugal, African coastline, and allowing these storms to just go whoop, just up and out, up and out, up and out, like so. With our positive NAO right in through here, where we have our stronger, more robust Azores high extending out across much of the Atlantic, our jet is not allowed to trough down as far to the south. And if you notice, our prevailing wind flow in the low to mid levels is going to allow these systems to transition towards the Lesser Antilles, through the Greater Antilles, and then up towards the southeast. And I think that's the direct correlation between El Nino, La Nina versus neutral, because if you think about it, and you kind of just use common sense, if we were in an El Nino all hurricane season and we had storms doing this, and then research would suggest that in a La Nina we typically have our long track storms doing this, well then let's put the puzzle pieces together. If we have a neutral setup to where everything's kind of in a state of equilibrium in terms of our North Atlantic Oscillation, our ENSO index across the Pacific, then a lot of the storms are going to want to do this. And some of those will include landfalls in Florida and the Southeast, the mid-Atlantic states. Let's see what else. What else did I highlight in here that I wanted to break down to you guys? Let's see. I did notice this. I had a chance to kind of digest exactly what this meant, and it's proven that even though we see lesser hurricane landfalls during a neutral hurricane season, Florida naturally has more of those landfalls observed during a neutral to weak La Nina as opposed to a full bona fide cold season or La Nina. If you guys look at this chart here, it might be a little difficult for you guys to see on your end, but the blue is going to obviously be for La Nina, the red is going to be for El Nino, and you can see how little there is. But if you notice, the general consensus is we could see more landfalls during, particular La Nina seasons, but neutral seasons are the deadly ones because we typically, on average, will realize in Central Florida, particularly the peninsula itself, at least on average 2 landfalls. 2 landfalls. Somebody, of course, commented on my video not too long ago and wanted to say clickbait. I don't know how. I'm at this point, I'm so fed up with clickbait. I don't understand how everything I could say the sky is falling, war to world's clickbait. Yeah. Anyways, the neutral season is where on average we could see an approximate 1 to 2 landfalls with a statistical value, I believe. Let's see. I saw it earlier. They have some decimal. Here we go. Initially, it appeared that there was no increase relative to neutral amount of hurricane landfalls in Florida during a cold event. However, the average number of hurricane landfalls per year for each neutral phase reveals a notable difference in the neutral phase and on the cold phase. For the East Coast, there is an average of 0.7 hurricanes that make landfall per cold phase. In Florida, there is an average of 0.78 landfalling hurricanes per cold event. During a neutral event, there are an average of 0.39 hurricane landfalls per year along the East Coast, and 0.67 landfalling hurricanes per year in Florida. There appears to be a significant decrease in hurricane landfalls during the neutral phase along the East Coast as opposed to Florida. And this is the kicker right here. This is the key takeaway that I want to emphasize every single time we even talk about this between now and next hurricane season. This would suggest that there is a dominant flow pattern during neutral years that tends to steer hurricanes towards Florida. And for all of you wondering why we're even talking about this, or if it seems like I just want to talk hurricanes and talk tropics, no, what I'm trying to do for everybody watching these videos is follow the breadcrumbs. We're playing Hansel and Gretel, and we're following the breadcrumbs. And we're all learning together how we can appropriately forecast for next hurricane season and many thereafter before we, God forbid, roll into more erroneous seasons where we have to deal with record-breaking temperatures and Category 7 hurricanes knocking on everyone's front door. That's the reason I'm doing this. It's not hype. It's not clickbait. It's not fear-mongering. I'm genuinely taking you guys along for the ride while I try to instruct and teach myself alongside my already current weather experience and become a better tropical forecaster, because I do think we're going to need more in our tool belt to predict these storms if we continue to see abnormal increases in our ocean temperatures to where we lose the battle against El Nino in the future. As a matter of fact, with that being said, I'm going to get my notes real quick because actually I don't know why I'm worried about walking away. I have my lapel on. You guys can still hear me. There's something I wanted to highlight to you guys that stood out to me during my research. It was a separate paper that I read. As I mentioned, I've been kind of doing the spider webbing. Let me see here. Where is it? Study whether vertical wind shear and SST. So here we go. There was a paper written by a couple of gentlemen named Shapiro and Goldenberg, and they studied whether or not, so a lot of people were talking earlier this hurricane season as to whether or not El Nino would win or the wind shear would win. If the sea surface temperatures would win against El Nino's wind shear. And there was actually a study done in the late 90s that already won this debate. So for a lot of people this year, including myself, this was brand spanking new. And it turns out, if we do the homework and we kind of research what has already happened through climatological history, this has already taken place. And I don't mean to this extent to where we've had such abnormal sea surface temperatures, especially during an El Nino. We've never had El Nino battling against record-breaking temperatures. But it says here, Shapiro and Goldenberg studied whether vertical wind shear or SSTs played more of a role in tropical development. And it was proven through scientific method and research over plenty of hurricane seasons that SSTs were proven to play a greater role. So it was already proven through trial and error and experimentation and observation in the late 90s by these gentlemen in association with NOAA that regardless of vertical wind shear, sea surface temperatures are going to win the battle. And that kind of leads me into why I want to continue to analyze this on a case-by-case basis as we move through the non-tropical season and prep for tropical season, because if we have very hot waters and areas where we're expecting elevated wind shear, not El Nino wind shear, but elevated wind shear to help us win against some of these approaching storms, it's very possible that the hot waters are almost going to make it seem as if the wind shear is non-existent. Hurricane Ian last year was a wonderful example of this. There were a lot of folks, and even the National Hurricane Center's preliminary projected path as Ian exited the coastline of Cuba and set his eye for the southeast, or I should say the southwest of the Florida Peninsula, a lot of folks were predicting that Ian was going to either weaken or maintain his Category 2, Category 3 strength because of the expected wind shear that was coming in via a front and a trough aloft. The problem with that is we had such hot sea surface temps in the Gulf of Mexico that wind shear played little to no role in trying to delineate the storm from rapid intensification before landfall, and that's how he managed to achieve Category 5 strength before making landfall. Conclusion, what do you guys care? Why is this important to you? Because we could start to see more and more instances of these systems being under forecast before landfall, and that's going to play a huge role in mandatory or voluntary evacuations. It's going to play a huge role in the way we prepare not only for the storm, but we also organize and strategize exactly how we anticipate performing relief efforts. This could change the name of the game. If we're expecting wind shear in a certain region to prevent a storm from rapidly intensifying or potentially coming ashore as a more volatile and dangerous storm, we might have to throw that out the window if these sea surface and ocean heat content temperatures continue to go up, because it's been proven before without abnormal sea temperatures that the ocean heat is going to win against wind shear in terms of these storms, especially since they start in the low levels and work their way up to the upper levels. So that's scary. That's kind of where I'm going with this, because a lot of people count on dry air. A lot of people count on wind shear. And for more and more of the readings and the different papers that I'm trying to quickly, look at between homework and frickin' final exams, my brain has oozed out of my ear. I've had to plunge it back into my head because I'm doing all this crap amid final exams. But statistically speaking, sea surface temperatures are always going to win against shear. Now, granted, am I saying we're going to get Cat 5s up the yin-yang just because the waters are hot and we have shear? No. But what I'm saying is we are more likely to see fervent tropical development in a hot ocean environment regardless of wind shear. Of course, there's also other variables that we need to be paying close attention to perform to fulfill tropical cyclogenesis, but I think you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. Let's see here. What else did I want to talk to you guys about? What else have I managed to digest? So this here was also very interesting. I've been looking at this feverishly, and not necessarily looking at the tracks, but I've been looking at everything else and kind of putting the context clues together in terms of what it is we need to start watching for in the big picture. So obviously we already mentioned North Atlantic oscillation. We want a strong high pressure here, which means we want a strong low pressure here, and near zonal flow, if not weak zonal flow, in the jet like so. So at the surface, we have our two semi-permanent pressure systems we want to watch out for. Recently studying in another case study that I read, well, I didn't read it. Shoot, it was freaking, I want to say like 75 pages long. There was another paper I found depicting what parameters to best use to forecast not only a hurricane or a tropical cyclone's forward progress, but also its speed with which it moves. And I feel so bad for saying this. You know what, I'm not even going to go there. But anyways, so this is what we want to look at both at the 200 millibar level and at the surface level. But there's also a multitude of parameters, which is why I know you guys have heard me say this before on this channel. You don't want to just look at the surface. It makes my head hurt when I see people mention this is what the models are showing down at the surface, and then down at the surface, And did I show you the surface? Because we got to take a look at the surface to dictate what the surface is doing at the surface level, because at the surface, we're at the surface, and we know what's happening at the surface anyways. We want to look at parameters at 850 all the way up to the 300 millibar level, predominantly at 850 through 500. 850 through 500 millibars is the proven margin of error you really should be paying close attention to if you're trying to predict tropical cyclone formation, if you're trying to predict track, if you're trying to predict intensity, and if you're trying to predict forward movement. 850 to 500 millibars is the sweet spot. You almost don't even need to look at the surface to get an idea of what's going to happen. Will the surface help? Absolutely. It's more bread to the puzzle, or I should say it's more bread to the crumbs, more pieces to the puzzle, but proven scientifically and meteorologically, you could make a very, very solid forecast for whatever tropical entity you're trying to track between 850 millibars and 500 millibars. So there's your little crash course on how to forecast tropical systems. We're all going to be hired by National Hurricane Center tomorrow. This concludes your on-the-job checklist. And I'm just kidding, no. So let me see here. This is also very, very particular, very interesting, because I'm willing to bet, well, actually, I'm not willing to bet, but I want to say that just trying to scrutinize this, I know this looks like a jumbled mess of tracks, but I'm willing to bet these are our August storms. These are possibly our September storms. These could very well potentially be our July and October storms out through here that lead to these sort of tracks during the hurricane season. But what's very interesting is if you notice, they all funnel into one general spot. There's really no spread. There's no dramatic spread. There's a tight concentration, unfortunately, right over the state of Florida. So this is the part that I'm still boggled with. I'll admit, I'm going to draw two giant question marks, because this would suggest, granted, if we were at multiple different times of the season, like I said, we have July and October storms in the Caribbean source region, and then we have our August and September storms, our long track systems that form near the Lesser Antilles and out near the Capes. Something either way would suggest that we're going to have a bottleneck right in through here. And so I need to do more homework to determine what creates that bottleneck, because it's not solely going to be the North Atlantic Oscillation. It's not solely going to be the jet. We clearly either over the last 100 years, we've had it perfectly synced up with the atmosphere to where when something's coming across here, something's building in across here and squeezing these systems up Florida and the East Coast, or the eastern extent of the Gulf Coast states, the New Orleans area, to the further to the east into the Florida Panhandle. So this is my next big thing I really want to study hardcore, is exactly what creates this bottleneck. Because if you come over to different hurricane seasons, you see this? Notice how we have a bit more of a spread now. We have a bit more of a spread. Whereas if we come back up to the neutral season, look at how our spread really decreases. Our spread is about this big. Damn, I didn't want my pen to get that small. Come on. Our spread is about yay big. Then if you come back down here, you see the difference. I'm going to overlay the two. You see the difference in how now we have storms that could go as far to the east as Bermuda, very similar to what we saw this year, and some getting in towards the New Orleans, Louisiana area. So something particularly during a neutral season, or a weak La Nina, we'll say, drives our storms right up through here. And so I'm very curious to learn more about that as I continue to do homework once my winter semester is over with. This is going to be very cool. I'm going to definitely keep this on copy and paste mode for when I start making content for next hurricane season, because this is going to definitely play a huge role in determining where it is we need to be monitoring for what type of a landfall and what type of a track of a system. But yeah, there's lots of really good information in here that I've been trying to piece together on my own. I also want to do more research on it's called the Hurricane Genesis Parameter. It almost sounds like some kind of secret undercover government project. I can't find any models. I can't find any specific data. I mean, granted, I was busy with work and other crap today, so I really didn't have a whole lot of time to study it. But supposedly there was a a model that was conceived back in the early 2000s called the Hurricane Genesis Parameter. And I haven't been able to find anything on it. I haven't had time to find anything on it. I've been so dang busy. It's unbelievable at this point, and it's so mentally exhausting. But I've been trying to research that as well, because I think that could also be a key towards providing very, very good future forecasts for a lot of folks out there, whether it be in the Pacific or across overseas into the cyclone and the typhoon region of tropics, and for our folks in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, the Bahamas. But NAO is going to be a critical thing to watch. We're also going to need to watch for what our surface steering flow does. So in layman's terms, the reason I have this up is at 850 millibars, you want really good organized, or at least fairly consolidated low-level relative vorticity to track your tropical systems before they make or they develop. Big mistake a lot of us were doing this year, including myself. No one was really paying attention to the 850 millibar vorticity level. Out of all the countless videos and articles I read, no one was paying attention to 850. So 850 millibars before we have cyclonic development or even just tropical wave organization, relative vorticity is what's going to be your best friend. And then at the 700 millibar level, I don't have it pulled up anymore. Here we go. At the 700 millibar level, you want to watch for prevailing westerly flow, or I should say easterly flow, across the Atlantic. So see, even right now, this would technically be a favorable setup for tropical development, just based on what we're having at 700 millibars. I know, granted, there's a lot more to it than that. We're not in tropical season, but that's just kind of a very, very slim piece of the puzzle. So in the research I've been doing, it's introduced me to so many different ways I could use these models to our advantage and help predict exactly what's going to happen without even needing to look at ensembles or National Hurricane Center, which is exciting for me, being the weather nerd that I am. There's still a lot more research to do. There's a tremendous amount of research to do, and I'll just show you guys exactly how much I was trying to do during my work schedule today. We have 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, 4 page, 5 page, for a total of 10 pages if you go front and back. I also took a final exam today, and I had to work 8 hours with a run in the gym and other things. So I've been seeing a lot of people mentioning how exhausted they were after the tropical season. And it's like, try me. I basically have pre-workout and caffeine coursing through my veins. And I already know I'm going to have to get used to it, because next hurricane season, if we want to be one of the best weather channels out there, we're going to have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. But anyways, so all in all, was this hurricane season a bust? You can be the judge of that. I think it was, in fact, a very, very active season, and it was a bust maybe in terms of landfalls, but I do believe this was more so an introduction. I think this hurricane season was a flagrant introduction to what it is we need to start preparing for in the near distant future, because no evidence suggests that our sea surface temperatures are going to calm down. They may wane a little bit and they may come down from where they are now, but they're not going to suddenly start cooling. There's just unfortunately no way, there's no rhyme or reason as to why they would suddenly start to trend down. So as I mentioned in my previous live stream on Friday, the question up in the air now is, are we going to continue to see market increases in our overall sea surface temperatures? Or was this the spike, kind of the crossing of a threshold into a new tier of overall sea surface warming, or global warming, if you will? And now we're going to go back to gradual increases until, unfortunately, we tip the scale to the next extreme and we suddenly see another spike. And God forbid the spike happens during a favorable season. Because if we had as hot of temperatures as we did this season, and you flip it to a La Nina, oh God, I don't even want to imagine that. We're going to get ready to close out the stream, and I just want to try very, very quickly to dig up some of the CANSIPS information that I've been seeing passed around online. I might not have been looking at some of the most recent stuff, because there was definitely something very interesting that I saw highlighted not too long ago. Where's the rest of my page? I just realized, why is it shrunk? There we go. Been watching too many Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. By the way, anyone fans of that movie series, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, and Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. Oh my God, some of my favorite Disney movies of all time. That is a prime Disney movie, in my opinion. Okay, so this looks, I think I've seen this before, looking at possibly 2 degrees warmer across all of our tropics, of course, all the tropics. I wish we had more information on here. I wish I could pull up to you guys the CANSIPS. Let me see if I can do a quick Google search and find it. CANSIPS ENSO forecast. Nope, that's not it. Jesus, this is a long paper, and I'm probably going to read it at some point. There was something that I wanted. This is it right here. This is what I want to show you guys. Because, you know, this is active for this year, but the most recent run of the CANSIPS actually has us dropping down further into La Nina, going into a weak to moderate La Nina for next hurricane season. I know this isn't exactly the same thing. This isn't a good representation of it. This is a different model. But I was looking at CANSIPS data earlier, and I completely forgot where it was. It was on my laptop. And the CANSIPS model specifically actually wants us to dip further into a La Nina with very few of these little spaghetti plots keeping us in a weak El Nino to neutral. We're actually trying to go bona fide La Nina for next year. So we're really going to have to see. Is El Nino going to crash and burn after strengthening as much as it is and getting as strong as it is? And then we're going to wander back into a weak to moderate La Nina, and that's where we're going to stabilize again, because that could also be very, very lethal over the next few years. If we don't bottom out into a neutral and then creep back into El Nino, we could possibly go back into a weak La Nina and then stay there for another 1 to 2 hurricane seasons, and that's just going to be relentless for a lot of us. The only positive that we can pull from that is the fact that if we do get a lot of strong storms in the Atlantic hitting us, we can count on the fact that they're eventually going to tap the ocean of its ocean heat content and its warm water by allowing it to, you know, pull up and out, up well, and then be sent up to the poles. So this is definitely episode 1, if you want to call it. I know this was a live stream, but this was essentially episode 1 of all the little finite details that I'm breaking down. Let me pull up. I'm going to pull up a blank piece of paper. I know figuratively on here, but you guys know what I mean. So here we go. So essentially, this is what I'm trying to do over the next couple of months. Like, yes, we're going to do our educational segments. Yes, I still, for the love of God, want to do a parody video. I think that would be hilarious, especially since there's barely anyone watching the channel. It's not like I'm going to get lit up and roasted for being silly. But right now, we're in the research phase. And what I'm trying to do is actually, you know what? Let's do it this way. Let's do like a spider web or I forget, like a food web or a food pyramid. We're in a research phase right here, and right now we're starting to branch off into a couple of different topics. And then as I study more, I want to branch off into different topics and talk more about tropics and exactly what kind of predictions we can start making. And as I go further and further down the rabbit hole, this is what I have in mind, at least the way my brain visualizes it. We're going to branch off into overarching themes, subtopics to subtopics to subtopics, and so on and so forth, like so. Is this going to probably tap me of all mental fortitude that I have left, not only after this semester and final exams? Oh, 175,000%. But is it going to be worth it, and is it very exciting to learn more and more? You bet your bottom dollar, for lack of a better term, and not being able to cuss. So this is kind of where my brain is at. If you guys want to take this crude representation of what I have in terms of a plan over the next several weeks as we rotate through the rest of winter and then into spring and then eventually the next hurricane season. We're going to spiderweb out and start looking at all sorts of different finite parameters, because obviously, like I kind of introduced you guys today, we have, neutral hurricane season. But then what causes the steering flow in the neutral hurricane season? Well, NAO and then prevailing winds in the Atlantic. Okay, but then how does the NAO play a role in it? NAO here, and then steering currents here and here. And then with this steering current, for example, how is that influenced and what effects does it have elsewhere with this piece of it? You know what I mean? Like, that's how we're going to just continue to break it down and just really, really, really rip everything apart and dissect it. Because truthfully, I think Mark Sudduth also said it on his channel too, because he likes to review some of the Climo data for the upcoming hurricane season, and he said it magnificently. And I know 90% of the people out there are going to be like, you have nothing better to talk about. So you want to talk about hype and hurricane seasons. And it's like, no, it's the fact that we have the computer data and the scientific research to allow us to look this far into the future, like little wishcasters, and we should take advantage of the opportunity to sit back and take such an extended period of time to research and study all the stuff that's going on out there. So I think that is what's going to be key to getting ahead of what could possibly be happening over the next several hurricane seasons. Not just next year, but the next several couple of hurricane seasons. And I'm only opening my video thing here like this because I don't have anything on the screen. So you guys can see Wxcenter up close. But that's all I got for tonight, guys. We're going to start wrapping up the stream. I'm a little over time. I wanted to keep this to about 45 minutes, but there was some rambling, just a little bit, but nothing too crazy. Now you guys kind of know exactly where my brain is at and what we're going to be doing over the next, we'll say months, the next few months, through the rest of this month. And then with every concurrent month after that, we're going to get new Climo data. We're going to start seeing preliminary forecasts from official sources. I definitely need to jump on the bandwagon and finally make a Twitter / an X and see exactly what I can dig up on that platform, and hopefully just continue to reinforce my knowledge to provide to you guys and help supplement what our YouTube community has, because there's obviously a lot of unearthed information out there that really deserves being dug up. Even if it is old, even if it is decades old, it's still weather material that will somehow translate over, because the world and Mother Nature ain't changing that much. But if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below, and I will definitely get back to you at my earliest convenience. And that's all she wrote. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, guys. The YouTube channel is plummeting, but you know what? We're going to keep going. We're going to use this as an excuse to be off the microscope and kind of just do whatever we want. Study what we want, research what we want, discuss what we want. And I almost think that, you know, it's a little bit more beneficial this way, because now we can kind of come up with all sorts of different theories internally and internally discuss them kind of like a working group, as opposed to, communicating a certain message for the people. And it's not like I don't want to communicate messages. I still want to update everybody out there who's tuning into the Wxcenter, but at the same time, this gives me the chance to dial it back and just kind of do homework, do research, do casual videos. So it's possible. It's very possible, Dylan. I think I looked at 2019 not too long ago. 2019 hurricane season tracks. I don't know. It's possible. It's very possible. I definitely don't agree with this, though. I think next hurricane season we're going to have at least 2 to 3 big ones roll through the Caribbean. They're not going to move out like they did this year. This year we got lucky in the Caribbean. We saw some very close scrapes to the Leeward Islands, but that's the only thing I disagree with. I think we're going to have 2 into Florida, not exactly where my X's are drawn. I think the Gulf Coast is going to finally see their big one again. And then we're going to have 2 to 3 lone wolves moving through the Caribbean. In fact, you know what? I'm going to be ballsy enough to say I'm predicting 2 landfalls for Florida next year. I'm predicting 2 landfalls for Florida next year. We had one this year during an El Nino. We're going to be in a neutral / weak La Nina next year. I think we're going to have, I'm making a prediction of 2 I'm predicting 2 landfalls for Florida. I'm predicting 2 landfalls for Florida. I think we're going to get a big one in the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to see 2 to 3 lone wolves moving to the Caribbean. And then we're obviously going to see some stuff moving up the East Coast like they always do. Bahamas is going to be an area that definitely needs to prep for a storm. Greater Antilles, the Leeward Islands, or I should say the Lesser Antilles for sure, are going to have to prep for more direct hits, I think. It's all going to become dependent on exactly what happens with our oscillation. If El Nino does stick around and all of our Climo models bust, then that's going to change the picture entirely. But this is what we want to keep watching. We want to keep watching this, and we also want to keep watching this. If this is December 4th right there. If we hypothetically continue this like so, and it starts to go down and down just like the models are predicting, that's a problem. And if we start to see this cooling off as well, because you can see El Nino is going strong for sure. El Nino is definitely kicking. We have areas of 2.5 to 3.0 degrees Charlie elevated. So El Nino is firing. If we start to see these decrease, if we start to see these colors on a month-to-month, week-to-week basis, more so month-to-month begin to go down, and we see those reds come down into the oranges, especially if you get closer to the whites, that's going to be a problem. That's when we really need to very quickly scramble to determine exactly what the pattern across this region is doing. And that's another reason, that's another thing, I hate to open up a can of worms. I know I wanted to end the stream, but that's another thing that I want to critique a lot of folks on for this hurricane season. So many people were focusing on what was happening here, and it was pissing me off to an extent because so much that happens in the Atlantic tropical region is in association with all of this. All of this is things you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at everything. And I'm so sick and tired of people just focusing on the tiny things. Yes, Nomad Cat 4, I agree. Bahamas are going to be opened up. Cuba is going to be opened up. Florida is going to be opened up. And the Lesser Antilles are going to have to brace for direct hits. Looks like El Nino is backing off. No strong El Nino. El Nino is, you know what? I'm not even going to go there right now. El Nino is definitely in a strong state. You're looking at the anomalies. You look at this for sure. El Nino is definitely firing on like all cylinders. It's there. It's screaming at us in the face. If that doesn't symbolize an El Nino, even just a static image right here, if this doesn't symbolize a strong and potent El Nino, then I don't know what does. This is all El Nino influence right there. That's why I have such tremendous shear and prevailing westerlies and southwesterlies. It was even in one of the research articles that I was reading that El Nino is characterized not by specific statistics or anything like that. It's just a characterization that happens across the northern hemisphere. If you have screaming prevailing westerlies and southwesterlies like this, and you have lots of open cell cumulus and outflow across the Atlantic, that is a characterization of El Nino for sure. And we've been getting such powerful impacts along the Gulf Coast and northern Florida that, yeah. Alfalfa, I 7,000% agree with you. And that's why I like having these conversations. Some people may think it's silly. A lot of folks will definitely go ahead and hit that clickbait button. But I think that after a hurricane season where a lot of our major catastrophes happen for a multitude of locations across the globe, this is our time to develop after action reports and preliminary action reports on a variety of different scales, not only preparing for certain phenomena, but as you mentioned, insurance, trying to double down on repair and relief efforts for certain areas. Hurricane Otis, not in relation to the Atlantic, but for example, out over in Mexico, they have a lot of things that they need to get amping up quick, and they need to take full advantage right now while we're in between hurricane seasons, because before you know it, I mean, the crunch down the street from my house is an excellent example of how long frickin', rebuilding and building takes. They've been taking over a year now to put up a gym. Imagine rebuilding an entire city. Like, this is where we need to take action and take advantage of this ceasefire. And that's why I'm going to spend the entire duration of non-tropical season digesting everything possible. Everything possible. I want to become a unofficial, hopefully soon to be official, subject matter expert on everything that I possibly can, even if it taxes me to living hell. I'm already almost to that point. I don't understand how, honestly, I don't know how I even have the brainwaves to make videos, get on live streams, take notes, do 4 other college classes, and work with patients all day while also tending to the family and everything. You know, I'm not looking for a sob story. I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm such a hardworking person, but like, you know, I sometimes I baffle and surprise myself in a good and a bad way. Sometimes I bite off more than I can chew, but I will be damned if I stop doing as much research as I can now before the time comes. Especially when it comes time to delineate between what's hype and what needs to be discussed. And yeah, that's why I'm not pulling any punches when people want to come on my channel and say hype or clickbait. It's like, no, you do something on your own then if that's the case. I know what it is I'm doing for my people, and that's what it boils down to. And whoever else jumps on the bandwagon as we roll through into next hurricane season, you're more than welcome to tag along. So now my rant is over with. We need to focus on other areas for tropical cyclones until we get Nazario global audience. Oh yeah, I agree. I definitely want to do that. I have a lot of studying I need to do. So we're working on it though. We got this. Oh yeah, that's going to be tough. Burning out. I've definitely been there before. And I want to unfortunately say I am slowly approaching that point, and I don't want to. So I definitely need to start pouring into my cup very soon. Somehow. Maybe when the semester's over with, I can definitely at least take a break from thinking about school and casually study some stuff about the weather. Because at the end of the day, at least it still technically counts towards my degree because, you know, it's weather, atmospheric science. See what I did there? But all right, guys. Genuinely, we're going to end the stream now. Thank you very much for watching tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure once again. I know you guys saw my big old intricate spider web of different things and thoughts and ideas that I'm going to be proposing on the channel as we go over the next couple of months. You also want to make sure you tag in on my TikTok and my Instagram for my posts on there, because I'll also be briefing and kind of debriefing on what it is that I learn and study and relaying it to you guys as well to the best of my ability. Because now's the time to track our severe weather and our winter events, but also kind of prep and take a preliminary glance at what could possibly be coming our way as we get ready for another hurricane season with potentially as abnormal, if not even more abnormal conditions out there to worry about, because we're going to have storms unleashed in areas that they were not unleashed this year. And that's the scary part, is how much stronger can these storms get in regions that were untapped this year? And I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that because of El Nino and all this. So we'll talk to you guys again very soon. We'll probably do a live on Wednesday. I may do a video tomorrow. I don't know how I feel about doing videos. The views are so down. You know, I don't know. Maybe you guys can convince me to do it. Maybe something will convince me to do it. But we'll see. Either way, I'll see you guys again soon. Please enjoy the rest of your night. And thank you for taking some time out of your Monday night to join me. Once again, it's always a joy. We'll talk to you guys on Wednesday, potentially. This is Wxcenter Nazario, signing out.